This time on Still Mormon.
My wife came to me. She just asked me the question. She said, if the prophet instructed you to take another wife, would you do it? I'm not very quick on my feet. And so I gave probably the worst possible answer. And I said, yeah, I would follow the prophet and I would take another wife.
Oh my.
Immediately she was, I could see it. She was heartbroken. It caused a rift in our marriage for, I would like to say, a few weeks. She didn't really talk to me. She, was angry. We have an amazing marriage. It's probably, that and maybe one other time is maybe any time that I could call a fight in our entire marriage. We have a wonderful relationship. And this really upset it.
So teach us about one of my favorite characters, Willard Richards, and what you're calling the divine reversal doctrine.
Essentially, a divine reversal means what's wrong is right, what's bad is good, what's thou shalt not means thou shalt now. I noticed that pretty much every time that type of reversal logic is discussed, it has some connection to Willard Richards.
This is Still Mormon, the show dedicated to unsettling Mormon history. Welcome back to Still Mormon. I'm Jeremy, your host. I am so excited to share with you today's episode. I sat down for an incredible conversation with Adrian Croft, who's written an outstanding essay called Unless the Lord Directs Otherwise, Willard Richards and the Origins of Divine Reversal in Early Mormon Polygamy. You're going to love this conversation, and you're going to learn so much about the development of early Mormon polygamy. I've spent a ton of time on William Clayton up to now. We're going to spend a lot more time on him, but there's another figure in early Mormon history, very close to William Clayton, close to Joseph Smith, close to the Mormon hierarchy, Willard Richards. And we need to understand him. We need to know who he was. We need to know the role he played in the development of early Mormon polygamy and also on our current understanding of polygamy today. But before we get to this incredible episode, on the last episode with my dear wife, Deborah, the feedback has been overwhelmingly positive in a way that, my other episodes have not been in quite the same way. The feedback's always been very positive, but this one has been quite unique. We've taken the show in a new direction, starting to have conversations. And I'm just really grateful to my sweetheart for coming on and to have had that incredibly raw and frank conversation with her about our marriage, about how we met, about experiences that she's had in terms of the doctrine of polygamy, some very startling things that she shared. And we've gotten so many comments and emails from people sharing their own stories. I think something in that episode really touched a nerve. I think it, because based on the feedback that we've gotten, apparently there's a lot of people out there who've had similar thoughts, similar experiences. And it's been really humbling to get that feedback. I want to thank those of you who've sent in comments and emails and shared with us your stories. If you have stories to share that you would like to send in, some that perhaps we might even read on the air, please email me at askme@stillmormon.com. Keep those stories coming. Also, if you're a couple, we mentioned this last time, who would like to come on the show and talk to Deborah and I, especially if you're a couple who are in a mixed belief dynamic. One of you believes that Joseph was not the originator of polygamy, and the other believes that he was, and perhaps it's causing a dynamic in your marriage that's difficult, but you would like to talk through it in a safe space. Please email us and let us know, and we'd love to talk to you and see if that it might be a fit for you to come on the show. Ask me at StillMormon.com. Email me, please. And also, I wanted to also reiterate that what we talked about last time about Deborah's charity, OneHeartChildren'sFoundation.org. This is a free plug. We don't get any benefit from this. The children do. If you're looking for a place to help widows and orphans, I encourage you, go to OneHeartChildren'sFoundation.org. They help so many children. It's truly life-saving. And if you are looking for a place to put some extra money and to, do as the Lord directs and help the widows and the fatherless, go to OneHeartChildren'sFoundation.org and you can donate there. And also, if you're having a little trouble in your marriage, and some of the things we talked about last time resonated with you, and you'd like to have a little help with polygamy issues or with intimacy issues, go to deepmarriage.me and you can find resources there. And I'm excited, by the way, for the many other conversations we have already recorded that I can't wait to share with you. We talked with Karen and William Hyatt many of my audience knows Karen Hyatt. Hi, Karen, if you're watching. What an incredible conversation, not just with her, but we got to know William, her husband, and you will love the conversation and what there is to teach us from what they shared. We spoke with Lowen and Heather Hardy from Canada. Their story is absolutely astonishing about how the doctrine of polygamy affected them early in their marriage and what it's like now. I can't wait to share that with you. Thank you for all your support, by the way. If those of you who would like to support the show, the links are below. And we are so grateful for those of you who choose to support the show. We can't do this without you, so thank you very much. If you haven't yet subscribed, please subscribe. Please like this video. Please comment. Please send us an email. Please share this. This is how the word gets out. Okay, now to today's conversation with Adrian Croft. Wow, I could not believe the depth and breadth of this conversation and how thoughtful, how intelligent Adrian is. He's a fantastic guy, and you're going to get to know him a little bit. And he's written a critically important paper that I mentioned. And this is a truly important conversation. We have broken this into 3 parts because, well, it's going to be more consumable. We put these into chunks that you can enjoy on your drive or during your workout. And we won't make you wait a long time to see all of them. We're going to give them all to you within about a span of a week. And you're not going to want to miss any part of this. In episode 1, we get to know Adrian, his background in the church, his family, his mission, his marriage. He's an active Latter-day Saint who has an unorthodox view related to polygamy. And importantly, we discuss how the doctrine of polygamy affected his marriage and how he became interested in studying it and in gaining some true expertise in areas of the historical record. Today's conversation, it's really good. It's really raw and real. And I think that you will love getting to know Adrian and why he's doing what he's doing. Then in part 2, we get into the documents and Adrian's exploration of a crazy doctrine, what he calls the divine reversal. This doctrine basically says that one thing at one time, which is wrong, can be right. What is bad can be good. What is unholy can become holy if God just changes his mind. And how there's one man, one historical figure whose fingerprints are all over this doctrine every single time it shows up in the record. The corpulent clerk himself, one Willard Richards. Adrian teaches us about the 4 primary documents in episode 2 containing this peculiar doctrine and how they are all connected to Willard Richards, the former secretary to Joseph Smith and church historian. You will be amazed at what you learn from this discussion. Then in part 3, the grand finale of the conversation goes into the most important document of all, the one which shows this doctrine of divine reversal in all of its peculiar glory, the celestial plural marriage revelation, and Richard's connection to that document as well. And if you want to have a fuller understanding of early Mormon polygamy and this truly singular, interesting, and very bizarre doctrine and its unorthodox development over time, this 3-part series is a must-watch. And now, here's part 1 of my incredible conversation with Adrian Croft. Adrian, thank you for coming and spending this time with me. I really, really appreciate it. When I read your paper and listened to your presentation on the divine reversal doctrine, I knew I wanted to talk to you because I think this is such a critical foundational understanding to the subject of polygamy, Mormon polygamy, its development, and its early forms. One of the things a lot of people don't understand is that celestial plural marriage, as we kind of know it, had an evolution from its early days, and you've hit on, I think, a significant portion of a part of that evolution and the origins of a feature that's still alive and well today, not just in the doctrine of plural marriage, but in Mormonism. And so I'm really excited to talk to you about that today. By the way, for the audience, Adrian has written a phenomenal paper that's been published by the Journal of Mormon Polygamy. What's the title?
It's called Unless the Lord Directs Otherwise. Can't remember exactly the evolution of the divine reversal in early Mormon polygamy.
So go to journalofmormonpolygamy.org and you can read his paper. One of the great things about that journal is the way that they publish the articles, all of the footnotes that are linkable to an online source, you can click on the link and go right to the footnote. And so you can see everything that Adrian has used to substantiate his paper, and you will learn a lot by reading it. So I highly recommend it. Adrian, welcome.
Thanks. It's good to be here.
I appreciate it.
Should be fun.
Yeah, I think so. I have been anticipating this conversation for a long time. So perfect. So first of all, before we get into your paper, I would like to know, you are a Latter-day Saint, correct?
I am. Yep.
A member in good standing?
Yep.
Okay. Can you give us a sense of your background? Where are you from? Tell us about your family, your upbringing in your family and in your community and in the church.
Okay. Well, I was born in Sandy, Utah. Grew up there in the 80s, and it was a great time to be a Mormon.
The magical decade.
In the 80s in Salt Lake Valley, right? So there was Relief Society and Scouts and, all of the things, Golden Green Balls and all the fun stuff that was a part of my upbringing. So I am the fifth child of 8.
Wow.
In my family. My parents loved kids, and we had a big family. And I come from big families. So my mom is the oldest of 10 children, and my dad is the youngest of 7. So I have bazillions cousins, and big families have been a part
Holidays
of
holidays are never boring.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So, and then as far as my family history on my dad's side, I think it's a 6th generation Mormon.
Okay.
I have ancestors who it was a little later than the early church than Nauvoo. They joined the church, I think, in the 1850s and crossed the plains in handcart company.
Okay.
And came to Utah. On my mom's side, it's a little bit different, actually. My grandparents are converts to the church. They joined the church in England, so my mom is British.
Wow. What year did they join?
It was, I think my mom was like 3 years old, so about 1951.
When she joined the church?
When her parents joined the church, so she was just 3 years old.
Wow.
She was the oldest. She had one sister.
What part of England?
Nottingham,
okay.
Robin Hood country. So
that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Wow.
So my grandparents joined the church with just a small family. They were the classic story of the last house on the last street of the day before the missionaries ended knocking, and they joined the church. And my grandpa kind of became a pretty prominent member growing up. In England. He was the first British stake president in England. And
wow.
That family, my grandparents and my mom and her sister, the ones that were born at the time, were actually the very first family that was sealed in the London Temple after it was built.
Oh my goodness.
It's kind of a cool thing.
That's great.
Yeah.
Wow. So you're a mix of the old and new worlds.
Yeah, a little bit.
Wow.
We got a connection to England a little bit. So my mom had an accent, and I always thought it was cool.
Your mom had an accent?
Yeah. Yeah. So she lived there till she was about 17 and then immigrated.
And Croft is that's your dad's side.
Yeah. But they're from England as well. So Croft is very British name. There's actually a Croft Castle in England somewhere that I want to go visit sometime. So.
Wow. Okay. And child of the 80s. And boy, the LDS church was so fun I remember the mid-late 70s when we had 2 meetings on Sundays. I don't think they got rid of that by the 80s. I think.
Yeah, I don't remember that. Maybe when I was really young.
That was intense. That was very intense to go to church twice on a Sunday.
A 3-hour block.
But all of the youth activities and scouting and EFYs and what a time to grow up in the church.
Yeah, I loved it. I was so excited. I used to always say I was so excited to turn 8. I remember, because I would be baptized and I could join the Cub Scouts. So it was both things that I was so excited for. And we lived here in Utah until I was 12, and then my dad actually lost his job, and my family ended up moving to Washington State. So my teenage years, I grew up in Washington State, which is a little different because we lived in this tiny little tourist town on the coast of Washington. And
Coos Bay?
No, it was called Westport was the town, very small, kind of charter fishing and that type of thing. And there, once we got there, it was just a little branch of the church that had about, I think when we got there, their membership was maybe 25 or something.
What was that like being a part of a little branch like that?
It was very different because it was, from the belly of the beast right to the mission field. And it was different because, my family, so my 2 oldest siblings didn't move with us. So 6 siblings and my parents moved there. So with the 8 of us that moved into that branch, we almost doubled the size of the branch. And within 6 months, my dad was the branch president. My mom was, I think, the primary president first. And I actually, when I was 14 years old, I was called to be the membership clerk.
14?
Yeah, because they didn't have anyone that could run the computer. I was, I've always kind of been into computers. So I did all the membership records from the time I was 14 on. And it was different. My sisters taught primary, and we were basically the only youth for a large amount of time in the church and in the school that I grew up in.
Wow. So, and only members in your school?
Pretty much, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And how long were you there?
So I lived there in Washington until, so I graduated from school there. I actually went to college at the University of Washington in Seattle for a year. And then I went on my mission. I served in Montevideo, Uruguay.
So did I.
Really?
Yeah. Well, I had no idea.
Yeah, that's where I was.
What year?
97 to 99.
I was there from 91 to 93.
Okay.
Well, how about that?
That's awesome.
That's pretty crazy.
Yeah. So I served in Uruguay. And when I got home from my mission, I was trying to decide what to do. I had to pay for college and that type of thing. And my oldest brother, who still lived in Salt Lake and was also into computers, he was able to get me kind of an internship, a job with him. And so that made the decision to move back down to Utah. I finished up my schooling at the University of Utah, got my degree in computer science.
Okay.
And worked through school with my older brother.
What year is this now?
So that would have been, graduate? When did I graduate? It was about 2001.
Okay. Wow. Yeah, we're about 3-4 years apart. Wow, yeah. That's crazy. Okay, so you get back home from your mission. So this is a very traditional Latter-day Saint upbringing.
Oh, very much so. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I remember. Yeah. So my parents were deeply interested in the deep doctrines of the church. And so we grew up with all the books in the library. And,
oh, really?
And my parents would be talking about the nature of eternity and how God sees the world. Like we pet an elephant, one part of the elephant at a time, but God can see the whole elephant. And I grew up with those kinds of memories, and the gospel was a constant topic in my home. Was your family a deeply devout family, or what was that upbringing like for you?
That's an interesting question, because I don't really feel like, as far as discussing doctrine, or that type of thing, was not very prominent in my family. We would try to do family home evenings, but it was hit and miss. We'd try to do family scripture study, very hit and miss there. But I would say, in spite of that, I would say that we were very devout and very active. With the British upbringing on both sides, my family has always had this very, everyone in my family has this very strong sense of duty.
Oh, okay.
And so we were always, if the church was having an activity, we were there. If there was a service project, we were there.
Yes.
So we always felt this obligation to be a part of everything.
Did you feel like that's cultural? Or was that faith-based, or both? In terms of the roots of it being, this is our cultural duty, or this is our duty to God, or was it a combination of the two?
That's a good question. I never thought about that. I'd say it's probably a combination of the two. I think that was the way they exercised their faith. They demonstrated their faith was by serving and doing and that type of thing. It was we had just some crazy things, like just a funny story. When we lived in Washington, we lived just right on the coast, and just on the other side of the highway, there's all of these peat moss bogs where ocean spray grows cranberries. It's just like 12 feet deep of peat moss that
I didn't know this.
Yeah.
So the ocean spray company, that's actually real.
Oh yeah.
It grows.
Yeah. So anyway, there was a member in our ward whose house was sinking into the peat moss bog, and the members of the church, my dad being the main one, took it upon themselves to jack the house out of the sinking bog. Good and so we'd spend multiple weekends crawling under this house with jacks and railroad ties, and you would try to jack up the house to level it, and rather than the house go up, the railroad tie would just get pushed into the bog. And so I can't remember how many they had to get in there until you had something solid to go out. So it was an interesting thing, but that's just kind of an example of the crazy types of service projects that it seems like we were always a part of.
Interesting. That's one of the things I have loved so much about my upbringing is the whether it's an Eagle Scout project or helping somebody move or taking dinners over or what have you, the opportunities for service, being on a mission at 19, right?
Mm-hmm.
And being out in a totally foreign environment where your whole mindset is not about yourself.
Yeah.
I think that's so incredibly valuable.
Oh yeah. Missions are the most amazing thing. And I recommend it to everybody.
Me too.
I try to help wherever I can for anybody that wants to serve and
especially South America.
Yeah. It's just such a life-changing, life-defining event. It's beautiful.
Very, very beautiful. Okay. So you come off your mission. How do you move into domestic life?
Yeah. So I had my exit interview with my mission president. And I remember one of the only things I remember that he told me is he said, now it's time to go home and get married and find a woman who loves the Lord more than she loves you. And so I took that to heart, and that was my goal, to find somebody. So I was living in Salt Lake, attending the U. Like I said, I wasn't on campus. I was fairly far off campus, but there's lots and lots of student wards and young single adult wards there. So I just started attending, and I met my wife kind of in the classic way, just in the singles ward.
Yeah. And
we met, and we kind of got to know each other as friends, and started dating. And once we started dating, as kind of a classic LDS story, we got married in 6 months or so after starting to date.
6 months is not it's not too short.
It's not as bad
3 weeks
as some, but
yeah, that's good.
Yeah, very
good. And how many kids do you have?
So we've got 5 kids, 1 boy and 4 girls.
Outnumbered.
Yep. So our oldest is married, and we've got 1 grandchild. So she's about to turn.
You're a grandpa.
Yeah, I'm a grandpa. So she's about to turn 1 here in a month or so.
Oh, congratulations.
And got a son down in St. George at school, and our middle child right now is on a mission.
Wow, that's great. Well, okay, so you're pretty stock Mormon story. That's very, very,
pretty much
very typical.
Very typical, yeah.
But you find yourself diving into a topic that's very atypical.
Yeah.
Related to plural marriage, celestial plural marriage, polygamy, spiritual wifery. How in the world did you go from that to even considering the possibility? Or I guess I should ask you, are you a believer that Joseph Smith was the originator and practicer of polygamy?
I'm not. I don't believe that. I don't accept that.
So I'd like to know how you got there, and how you have balanced, because it sounds like you have a great affection for. You're active in the church. How did that happen?
That's a good question. So first, just on the affection for the church, like I said, I love the church. I love missions. I love the community that it provides, the people that are there, the opportunities for service. And I feel like there's no other way, or that I have seen that can do it quite as well as the church does. So, that's why I stay. And I think at the end we'll maybe talk about that a little bit some more. But as far as polygamy goes, I guess one thing I would say is I have always been kind of a deep dive kind of guy that's just all in to a particular topic that interests me. And, even as a kid, I remember, learning about the sinking of the Titanic, and that just fascinated me. And so I went and got all the books from the library I could about the Titanic. And, at the time I could rattle off all of these, this information. And I would do that topic over and over again, ancient Egypt and, all types of things. And so that's kind of been a part of my personality for a long time. And even as an adult, I became like a really nerdy Disney adult for a while. I was just fascinated by Walt Disney and what he accomplished, and Disneyland and how he built that, and Imagineering and all that type of thing. And so for a few years in my adulthood, I was just so struck by Disney and Disneyland. I could tell you tons of stuff. So anyway, that's kind of a part of my personality. And
so if you get interested in something.
Yeah, I just go all in, and I'll read multiple books and spend hours and days researching that, just because it's something that just grabs my attention. So,
how did this grab your attention? What?
Well,
because did you know? Were you so? Some Latter-day Saints they knew from the time they were young that plural marriage is a thing, and that Joseph Smith was practicing it. I had that understanding as a young person. I didn't understand the complexity of Joseph's the stories of his marital life. but my grandparents talked about our ancestry, and so I knew the general narrative, so it wasn't a surprise to me ever. But for some people, it's such a surprise. Was it a surprise to you, learning, or did you always know that Joseph was a polygamist from the traditional?
I remember
narrative?
From a fairly early age hearing that, Joseph was a polygamist too. So it was kind of at least there.
Would that have been in Washington?
In my mind? Probably in Washington. But as a lot of people have said, is in the 80s in the church, that was never discussed.
That's right.
In open circles. It was very much monogamous. Joseph and Emma, that was the ideal. And so I think within the church, the official lines, it was Joseph and Emma, and then Brigham was polygamy.
Yes.
But I know that kind of in hushed back rooms or whatever, Joseph was a polygamist too. I don't remember exactly the details of that, but I know that was, I at least knew that
somewhere in there
that was being discussed. So as far as me getting into it, I remember I can't remember exactly the number of years, but 10 to 15 years ago, my wife came to me just kind of out of the blue, and I wasn't prepared for it at all, but she just asked me the question. She said, if the prophet came to you and asked you or told you, instructed you to take another wife, would you do it? Because my wife actually has a different Mormon story, and it's a thing that has bothered her for a long time. And I think that was we hadn't talked about it before that, and I think that maybe have been her way to kind of broach the subject with me. And that's that question: would you follow the prophet and do this? It's a very loaded question, right? You can't. There's not a right answer. If you say yes, then you've betrayed her. And if you say no, you're not a good Peter priesthood that you're supposed to be. That is very much like the persona that I was trying to aspire to, right? Good follow the prophet Mormon boy, right? So, I hesitated to answer, but she wanted an answer in the moment, and I'm not very quick on my feet. And so I gave probably the worst possible answer. And I said, yeah, I would follow the prophet and I would take another wife.
Oh my.
And, immediately she was, I could see it. She was heartbroken. It broke her heart. And it caused a rift in our marriage for, I would like to say, a few weeks. She didn't really talk to me. She, was angry, and really, we have an amazing marriage. It's probably, that and maybe one other time is maybe any time that I could call a fight in our entire marriage. We have a wonderful relationship.
Wow.
And this really upset it. I don't really remember how it got resolved. I think we just kind of agreed not to talk about it. And eventually she started talking to me again. And it's interesting to me that at that time, I didn't actually do a deep dive. I think, our kids were young and I was busy, trying to build a life. And so I didn't deep dive, but that was really kind of where that entered my mind, and entered our marriage was that question. So fast forward, until, and again, I don't remember the details. I don't have a good memory for details, but, a few years ago, probably 2022, 2021, around there, I think we did kind of start, asking questions and investigating some things, not quite the deep dive yet. But I do remember that something on YouTube came up in my feed. And unfortunately, I don't remember if it was Rob Fotheringham or if it was Michelle. I don't remember what the video was, but it was something along those lines that really sparked it. And it came up in my feed, and I sent it to her, and that's what started it. We just dove all in after that. We watched everything we could, and not just the deniers or the skeptics. We were trying to find faithful sources as well, and learn, approach it from all different angles. And so that's kind of the genesis of it. And it hasn't been, unlike all my other deep dives, this one, at least for now, is still going. There's so much there.
Yes.
It's interesting that, you think that, I think before all of this, church history is, I would think that it was boring, but now it's just endlessly fascinating. There's just so much intrigue and drama, and
it's the best kept secret in the American story. It really is.
It's fascinating. And so, I don't really see myself, stopping anytime soon, as far as trying to learn as much as I can, and trying to keep an open mind, and I guess as Elder Uchtdorf would say, doubt my doubts, doubt my questions, take everything with a grain of salt and try to figure out where the truth is.
Wow. How long into, so you become intrigued by it. In the beginning, is it safe to say it was a curiosity, or did you feel a pull toward there's something wrong here? How did you approach it in the beginning?
I think it was actually pretty quick. Like Karen Hyatt tells the story of how she came across Rob Fotheringham's video, and he laid it out, and she said, at that moment she was done. It was just like flipped a switch. And I think it was pretty similar for us. Like once we saw
your
this,
wife?
yeah, we're very much on the same page.
Wow.
With this, and
that doesn't always happen.
No, definitely doesn't. But we're lucky that it is.
So you went down the road together.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I shared that video with her, and then we started. Things started coming up in the feed, and we share them back and forth with each other and talk about it.
When people struggle, since it happened so quickly for you, for me, it happened over a number of years, and it was a transition. Would you say it was like a period of a year, or was it, or did a light bulb come on fairly early on to say, to me, this makes more sense than the other narrative? How was that for you?
I think it was more of a light bulb. It was more like once it's laid out, like that just makes so much more sense. And, to the heart and the mind, it makes sense logically and it feels right.
Well, some people would say,
better, right?
Some people playing not the devil's advocate, but the traditional advocate, let's put it that way. They would say it's just confirming something that you wanted, that you didn't, that you would prefer to let go of.
And I like I say, there was that thing 10 or 15 years ago that like, whoa, this is a problem. But beyond that, I don't know that it was like, oh, is there a way that we can get rid of this? I don't know that I pondered that. Okay. It was just like,
you were comfortable with, it's just part of our history.
Right.
And
it was
has
like,
to come back.
Put it on the shelf type thing.
Okay. For your wife, however, on the other hand.
Yeah, it was very much more internalized but she didn't really share that with me very much.
Okay.
But yeah, for me, I wasn't looking to justify anything or, confirmation bias or whatever. I wasn't trying to find a way to like resolve my doubts. It was just like, all right, this is a weird thing. Here's an explanation. And this is the other explanation. Which one makes most sense? And light bulb, it just seemed clear.
At a certain point.
Yeah.
The two narratives placed in front of you.
Yeah.
This one was clearer for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. So you had to have enough interest and conviction in it to write a paper, which that's another step. That's another order of magnitude, actually, to go from curiosity to even a deep dive to actually wanting to express something in writing that other people get to scrutinize.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I would say that was more of a progression. So, it's one thing to say, okay, for us, this makes most sense. We'll sit with that and continue about our business. But to get involved in the journal, write a paper, that's different. But so I did want to talk about why did I take that next step?
Yep.
Right? How did I get there? And I actually have some slides to help me remember some notes. So
please,
if you want,
please.
Up here. Just got to switch over. If you don't mind, I'll just say that once again, this presentation is my personal research. I'm not representative of the church in any way. These are my only my views. So the question is, why do I do this? And I actually came up with 5 reasons, that I think are very strong and compelling reasons that would cause me to put myself out here like I am. Right? It's a risky place to be.
Yeah.
So first off, in Jacob chapter 2, verse 30 gets a lot of attention. Right? Yep. It's the exception clause, but we don't look at Jacob 2:35 as much, which says, you have done greater iniquities than the Lamanites, our brethren. You have broken the hearts of your tender wives and lost the confidence of your children because of your bad examples before them. And the sobbings of their hearts ascend up to God against you. And because of the strictness of the word of God, which cometh down against you, many hearts died, pierced with deep wounds. So that was the first one. That's what I saw in my wife when I said I would take another wife, right? Her heart was broken. It was pierced.
You say broken. That's
deep wounds. It was serious. And
wow.
And I think as men in the church, we don't really realize the grief that it causes to women. And I don't know that I fully even understand it now, but having been in this space for long enough, I have seen many women whose hearts are broken with deep wounds because of this doctrine. And so it's important to me to find out the truth.
I'm with you on that. I've said it a couple times before, but I was insensitive, completely insensitive in ways that I should not have been previously. Not because I was pining away for plural marriage, but it's a doctrine of the church, and
Right.
what am I going to do about it? It's in the scriptures,
Yeah.
I think that this starting point is so critical. If you want to hold on to the doctrine, at least also understand this, and that it's inescapable. The history of plural marriage is littered. It's almost exclusively that. You have stories here and there that defy this, but this is the rule within that system.
Yeah, is it Zina Huntington who wrote that we just had to hold our husbands with indifference?
That's right. And Lucy Walker said the same thing about Heber Kimball. This is very common.
Yeah.
They don't marry for love.
Yeah.
They marry for a principle, and in some ways that's how you have to do it in order to make it work.
And to avoid having their hearts broken, they just have to close them up.
Close their hearts.
Shut it.
That's right.
And it's horrific.
And how can you be one with this person God has given you, and you're to model Adam and Eve, and we're to be one like they were told to be one? How can we do that?
Right. And that's exactly my next point. So I want that. I want to be one with my wife, and I don't want this question hanging around in my mind, do I need to keep my heart open for another, if I'm going to be faithful, and follow the prophet, will there be some time where I'm commanded or encouraged to take another wife? I want a certainty that when the Lord says, thou shalt love thy wife with all thy heart and shall cleave unto her and none else, I want to know for certainty that that's true.
This is given, I believe, 1831, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
So right at the very time, this is from Joseph Smith, the Lord reiterates to the whole church as the law of the church. This is part of the law of the church.
Yeah.
To cleave unto a wife and to be one with that woman. Right at the supposed time when he's supposed to be receiving this revelation for the first time. Yeah.
Yeah. And like you say, it's what's known as the law, right? The law of the church is D&C 42. So next reason, so another thing that we've been experienced through all this, I think it's pretty well known that there's been an increase in people stepping away from the church for multiple reasons. And we've seen that. We had some friends in our ward who, got into things like the CES letter and other things like that. And they just decided to stop going. And it broke our hearts. At the time, the brother was, I think he was our son's scout leader, and he just loved him, looked up to him. And then all of a sudden they're gone. They just step away, and this beautiful family that's been heartbroken. And
was it
away.
over this issue?
It was, I think it was like all things CES letter. So polygamy, Book of Abraham, all that type of stuff. History, that type of thing. So that was one of them. We actually have some good friends that was a roommate with my wife in college. Again, wonderful family that they got into some of the history things and questions, polygamy, and they've stepped away. And we know of family members that have done the same thing. And so to us that breaks our heart. Not to say that at this point in my life, I don't say that you have to stay in the church to be a good person, but to separate yourself from all the good that is there for things that might have better answers is just a sad thing.
So if the polygamy issue is not part of the equation of the things people look at, if you can't say Joseph lied to his wife, he lied to the church, and he seduced and pressured teenage girls with the notion of having, saving their families, that kind of thing, using his position of authority. That's what wrecks people the most. In my view.
Yeah, definitely.
So if you take that off the table, all of a sudden the first vision accounts, they're not necessarily as potent, because you're not viewing necessarily Joseph Smith as being a fundamental liar.
Right.
When you look at the first vision accounts in light of a guy who's a liar, then the discrepancies in those accounts just confirm he's just making this up.
Right.
But if you take out the fact that, or take out the idea of him being a liar, because you can't prove it by the documents, which you can't, by the way, for those of you watching, you can't prove by the documents that he's a liar. You can only prove that he's a liar by other people who are not themselves truthful. That's the challenge with this. So if you pull that out, then the other things, the book of Abraham even is a little less daunting, because we're not dealing with a fundamental hypocrite.
Right. I totally agree. Yeah, I think polygamy is really the crux of it all.
So that's part of your motivating factor to not just study it, but get it to a point where you can advance some of the ideas behind the understanding it more deeply.
Yeah, I think so. Really, as my next slide here says, is what I care about is what is the truth. If that's the truth about Joseph Smith, I'll have to find a way to deal with that. But it's, as we're taught in the Book of Mormon, it's not, you can't have faith in something that's not true. So truth should take precedent over everything. Alma 32 says faith, if you have faith, you hope for things which are not seen, which are true. So that's a motivating factor for me. I want to be able to have faith in things that are true. So the question is polygamy a true principle, a doctrine of the church or not? Because I can't have faith in something that's not true. And finally, very similarly, I think it's very much a travesty that the lectures on faith have been removed from the Doctrine and Covenants. That's the doctrine that Joseph Smith wanted to promote, right? And the doctrine, or the lectures on faith, teach. This is a little bit long, but I'd like to read it. Where this is from the third lecture on faith, where he says, "Let us here observe that three things are necessary in order that any rational and intelligent being may exercise faith in God unto life and salvation. First, the idea that he actually exists. Secondly, a correct idea of his character, perfections, and attributes. Thirdly, an actual knowledge that the course of life which he is pursuing is according to his will. For without an acquaintance with these three important facts, the faith of every rational being must be imperfect and unproductive. But with this understanding, it can become perfect and fruitful, abounding in righteousness unto the praise and glory of God the Father and the Lord Jesus Christ." And it quotes DNC 3:2, "For God does not walk in crooked paths, neither does he turn to the right hand or the left, or vary from that which he has said. Therefore his paths are straight, and his course is one eternal round. But it is equally as necessary that men should have the idea that he is a God who changes not, in order to have faith in him, as it is to have the idea that he is gracious and long-suffering. For without the idea of unchangeableness in the character of the deity, doubt would take the place of faith. But with the idea that he changes not, faith lays hold upon the excellencies in his character with unshaken confidence, believing he is the same yesterday, today, and forever, and that his course is one eternal round." So this idea of unchangeableness, is God a God who at some times requires polygamy and at other times he does not? This would hint to that he does not change. He's not a fickle God. He's not changing those requirements from one generation to the next. And it also tells us that we can't have faith unto life and salvation if we're believing in a God that changes.
That changes, right? A God that it also talks about him being no respecter of persons, and a God who is a God of love. God is love, is what the lectures say.
It does, yeah.
And how do we have a God of love who parses out his benevolence unequally, right? And this is so critical. I find that all of the biggest questions people have that lead them to agnosticism or some form of a God after their own making. If there was a God, why then would he allow, name your suffering, right? This is critical to understand. This answers that if you ponder it, that he's an unchangeable God and he sets the same standards and stakes for everyone. Well, how's that the case if there's a billionaire and there's a little kid digging in the dirt for a mushroom, to eat something in Uruguay, going through the trash piles in Montevideo? How do you reconcile that? Well, this is where we start by understanding God is actually no respecter of persons, despite the fact that we have unequal physical circumstances. He loves all of us equally.
Right.
But polygamy gets way in the way of that.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, and the lectures are just amazing. If anyone listening who hasn't read the lectures on faith should go and do that.
They were scripture.
Yep.
They were in the 1835 Doctrine and Covenants. They were the doctrine portion of the Doctrine and Covenants, the first 70 pages. They actually had a larger font to separate it from the rest of the book, almost to say, this is kind of the foundational portion of our faith.
Mm-hmm.
And it was voted on by the entire church. They removed it by a committee of people that, and the reason they said they removed it, they said it wasn't canonized. That's not true.
Yeah.
It's canonized scripture. And even Bruce R. McConkie viewed it as scripture. So I agree with you wholeheartedly.
Obviously, Joseph Smith viewed it as scripture,
Absolutely,
because he put it in there. But
very good. I appreciate that.
All right. So that is kind of the intro. Unless you had any other questions, we can get into the.
So because you have this macro understanding from Joseph Smith. So it's not, to me, it sounds like you're reconciling your understanding of the gospel with what Joseph Smith teaches. And now you're seeing, okay, there's this thing that seems anomalous from that fundamental understanding.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it, it's interesting, if you look at any of the apologists or promoters, the historians, anybody who's kind of a faithful member of the church that's trying to explain polygamy, it's interesting to me that everyone qualifies it with, I don't like polygamy. I don't understand polygamy. Right. So there's this inherent yuckiness about it that everyone just chooses to ignore. That, well, we did it, so it must have been right.
Well, more and more too. More and more of the scholars in the church are going down the road of, this is horrible. It was terrible. Never should have been done. And Joseph was a sinner for doing it.
Right. Yeah. That it was a mistake in some way.
Right.
Yeah.
And while you can make a case for that historically, I think it's far more reasonable, frankly, to look at the fruits of polygamy and come to that conclusion without really understanding all the documents, because the ones who say that, they don't understand the documents. The Faith Matters crew, they don't understand the documents, for example. But I think it's a far more reasonable conclusion to say, yeah, Joseph made a mistake, than it is to say that this was inspired of God and it is God's will. Because the points you're bringing up about an unchangeable God, that's what they're trying to wrestle with.
Yeah.
And by the way, you can hold that position. You can be a scholar in the church and you can say it was a mistake.
You just can't say
Joseph didn't do it, which is an interesting place to be.
Yeah, it's an interesting line to draw for sure. But there isn't any, the way that polygamy was taught and presented, if you look at the Journal of Discourses, it was the highest, holiest principle. You have to be a polygamist.
An absolute requirement in your heart, the celestial kingdom.
To reach the highest degree of the celestial kingdom, you had to participate, or at least be one in your heart. So why aren't these apologists and historians? Why do they recoil?
Why don't they embrace it?
Yes, and say,
that's a great question.
It's unfortunate that we can't live it now, but I look forward to the day when it will be restored.
Well, so when you find someone who's a true believer, and they're trying to reconcile this, they throw themselves into it and they actually love it.
Yeah.
And I think both are somewhat understandable. It's the ones in the middle who are trying to have it both ways, right? I hate this, but it's godly.
Right.
The ones who say this is godly and this is the law of the celestial kingdom, or the ones who say, no, the fruit of it, I can't reconcile the fruit.
Yeah.
Therefore, it was a mistake. I have more, well, it's the Lord. I would that you were hot or cold, but you're lukewarm. I got to spew you out of my mouth.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, should we get into this?
Yeah, let's do.
Take a sip here.
So teach us about one of my favorite characters, Willard Richards, and what you're calling the divine reversal doctrine.
All right.
Is that a phrase that is used by anyone? Is this the phrase that you've coined?
No, I've coined it. So I've made it up.
I think
we'll see if it catches on.
I think it will.
Not that I have any aspirations for that, but I'll talk about it here in a minute. But I wanted something that could really articulate what we're seeing. So just kind of as an intro to my paper, like I said, I've been in this deep dive for a long time. I've been researching articles and or sources and watching podcasts and what have you. And one thing that kind of came to my attention is these people that we're talking about that are trying to in some way defend polygamy. They always say that that polygamy is the exception, but monogamy is the rule. There's always this kind of exception or reversal or that type of thing. This idea that most of the time God's not going to command it, but sometimes He will. And this concept is articulated in a few of the sources that we find in Joseph Smith's time. And as I was learning about them and studying, I noticed that pretty much every time that type of reversal logic is discussed, it has some connection to Willard Richards. And I thought, oh, that's curious. So that's kind of what was the impetus of my paper. Like, well, let's dig into this a little bit more and see if I can find anything along those lines. So, for the academic world, well, I guess maybe we should back up for a minute and talk about who's Willard Richards. Should we talk about that for just a second? Please. So Willard Richards was actually Brigham Young's cousin. Mm-hmm. Not everyone knows that, but he was introduced to the church by Brigham Young, baptized by Brigham Young. I think it was at the end of 1836, if I remember right. And he quickly, kind of rose through the ranks. He was baptized 1836, 1837. He, I think he went to Kirtland around that time frame, and he went on a mission to England, mm-hmm. as you've talked about quite a bit, with that whole group that was, what was that, 1838 to 41?
41, yeah.
Is that right?
For the most part, yeah.
That whole clan went together. Brigham Young, Heber C. Kimball, William Clayton, Willard Richards, Joseph Fielding.
Yep.
There.
Wilford Woodruff.
So that whole clan went to England, served that mission together. They came back in summer of 1841. And then that's when Willard really got to know Joseph Smith. He had some kind of background in publishing and things like that. So he was kind of hired on as Joseph Smith's scribe and recorder. Eventually he was, I don't know if you say promoted, but given the calling of church historian at the end of 1842. And then he was just kind of there in the thick of things. He was assigned to compile the history of the church. And they say that any document from Joseph Smith's time related to Joseph Smith probably passed through Willard Richards' hands in some form. He either wrote it himself or he compiled it into the history or edited it or whatever. So he was very integral to the formation of the written record of the church as it started out. And so the focus of my paper is, the question is, how much influence did the clerks and the scribes who were actually writing the record, how much influence could they or might they have had on the evolution of the doctrine of the church? We kind of think, oh, they're just passive transcribers. They just write down what they hear, and so anything they wrote down is what was said. But one of the examples I used in my presentation that I gave at the Journal of Mormon Polygamy conferences is this. What Willard wrote down, a very the rough stone rolling quote. There's the book Rough Stone Rolling that is based off of this quote here. When the speech was given, when Joseph Smith said he was the rough stone rolling, all that was written down was rough stone rolling downhill. And that's what was in the notes. But then you look at the final manuscript history of the church and you see this quote on the right. I'm not going to read it, but it's much longer. It's 150 words. Now, so the question is that what Joseph Smith said, or is that what Willard Richards thought he said? Or did he refine the language, or did he make it more poetic? It's very flowery and it sounds great. But is that what Joseph Smith said, or is it what people thought he should have said?
And even in the journal, we talk about, there's a misnomer that he kept his journal. It's not really a journal.
Right.
We can call it a journal of sorts, but it's not Joseph's personal thoughts. It's not his personal musings, his feelings about things. These are Richard's observations. So Richards is keeping a memo book and observing things that are going on from Joseph, and writing in very sparse form, and he'll often write the weather was fine and leave a big blank page because he wants to note the weather, and then come back later and record what happened. There's nothing wrong with that, by the way. It's just it's a way of, it was one of the steps of constructing the history, as he developed something called the history draft. The history draft was a rough draft of the history, and then he had other clerks filling out, especially Thomas Bullock, filling out the manuscript history, which became the formal history. And so So we think of these things we know from Joseph Smith as though they're sitting there taking dictation, like sometimes would happen.
Right.
Sometimes you'd have clerks or individuals taking notes of a sermon, and then Andy Ehat, for example, put those together in the words of Joseph Smith, and we have some idea, but we have to still be careful because are these verbatim? No, it's not a recording. These are notes.
Right.
This is very different. This is an order of magnitude different. This is someone getting an impression, and who knows if even Joseph said that exactly, who knows? Rough stone rolling downhill. Maybe he did. But what did he mean by it?
Right.
Did he mean that? So I love that you start with that point, because we have to frame these things properly. When we're looking at LDS church history, we are not looking at solid documentary evidence at every turn for the things that we establish as fact. We're looking at highly fragmentary recorded events. And so we have to be very careful with how we determine what actually happened and what didn't. Okay, continue.
Right. So this particular one it's fairly benign. It's there's no doctrine here that's being expounded upon. It's just flowery language. And this phenomenon is pretty widely acknowledged and accepted by historians and whoever, that this is something that, and it wasn't just Willard Richards. It was just kind of, there wasn't good rules about how to take history in, the 1840s, right?
Well, the difference with this is these were done after his death.
Right.
So while Joseph was alive, he could sit and dictate to his clerks, and they could write things down and come up with a narrative and then read it back to him.
Right.
Which is what they did. But they only got to about 1838 in that history when he died. And so everything we have from 1838 forward is this kind of narrative.
Right. Yeah. So in, my paper, I had some goals to, first to just point out this pattern that I noticed, and just to, secondly, to suggest some alternative explanations to the established narrative. We always hear that the history is settled, the narrative's established. But, me as an amateur, just, somebody who's thoughtful, but, not trained as a historian, can think of multiple alternate explanations to things that have not been discussed, and not been ruled out. And they're just as plausible, or maybe more plausible than what the standard narrative contains. So one thing I tried not to do, and I try not to do, is to assign motive to Willard Richards. And, I may talk about that some more, but, first off, he had a pretty monumental task to compile the history of the church.
Absolutely.
It's like, that's unprecedented, to a brand new religion in the American West, and to compile that, so much going on with congregations in multiple states, and, all that type of thing. And, the other thing is, Richards he was an educated man himself. He was a physician, a Thomasonian physician, they say. And he had a lot of experience in, like I said, printing and that type of thing. So as a man of his own, how much did he feel like he should influence in the way things were recorded? And he may not have had bad motives for that. He just thought, maybe I can put my spin that's a little more refined than Joseph's. Who knows? So anyway, try not to assign too much motive. So getting back to the divine reversal. So here's a very wordy definition of the divine reversal that I just, I identified in these sources. So we'll define it here first. What I said is, it's a theological logic introducing conditions under which otherwise prohibited actions could become divinely sanctioned. In essence, the doctrine asserts that a specific present revelation from God does not merely permit deviation or exception from standing moral law, but redefines the moral status of the act itself, transforming what would otherwise constitute a sin, such as adultery, into something lawful and righteous. So that's why the reason I coined this term divine reversal. There is a fairly well-known concept that I think is called just divine command theory, that whatever God commands is right or justified, right? But I wanted to take it a step further than that, because rather than just something being justified, that you're allowed to do a certain thing in a certain circumstance, that this is a complete reversal of a thing. So rather than being prohibited most of the time and justified in an exceptional case, this is reversing that. Rather than being prohibited, it's encouraged. It becomes something holy, right? Yes. So polygamy, which is essentially adultery, right?
In one case.
Right.
Right.
So adultery is prohibited. It's one of the 10 commandments, but it's a reversal in the sense that not is it just permitted, but it's encouraged. It becomes, like we talked about, something high and holy and the aspirational. So that's why I coined this term reversal, in that it's not just a justification, it's a complete.
I think that framing is really, really important. I know in your paper you talk about, there are examples that are often cited: Nephi killing Laban, Abraham, lying about his wife,
right,
calling her his sister. However, those are not quite the same at all. Why aren't those the same?
Yeah, and that's exactly why I said it. So those are extenuating circumstances. Those are justifications. They're I think the academic term is a tragic necessity. It's something that had to be done. It's allowed or permitted in a certain circumstance.
God says it's better that one man perish than a whole nation, or one man die than a whole nation dwindle in
unbelief. Right.
And also, he had sought their lives. He tried to kill them, and he had stolen their property. And so this was not, in that sense, I guess some could argue it's murder, but it's not the same.
Right.
This was a preemptive action against an offensive action, if you will.
Yeah. And there's been research done, to say that, under the law, he was justified, right?
I've heard that as well.
The word justified. And I'm fine with that.
Because the commandment is thou shalt not murder.
Right.
Okay. Thou shalt not kill. It's murder. It's the unlawful taking of a life. Obviously.
Yeah.
There is lawful taking of life. And then in the case of Abraham, Sarai was his half-sister.
Right.
And so was that a lie? That was not full disclosure, but that was not a lie. And so therefore, are we really at all even talking about the same thing? I don't think we're talking in the same realm at all when we're talking about this concept of divine reversal.
And that's why I wanted to bring in reversal, because so to make an equivalent, comparison with what happened with adultery being reversed, it would be like Nephi kills Laban, and then he teaches that everyone must commit one murder to enter into the celestial kingdom, right? That's the reversal, that it now becomes something that's holy, that's required, that's encouraged, that no longer constitutes a sin in any way. Or with Abraham, everyone must tell a lie to enter into the celestial kingdom. So
yes,
that's what I think is important about this doctrine, is that a true doctrine of the church, that something that was bad can become good.
Which is interesting. You bring both of those up, because we have both the teaching of blood atonement, and we also have the principle of lying for the Lord.
Yeah.
And so both of those find their way under this divine reversal.
Yeah, it definitely does. And I touch on that in my paper just a little bit at the end, that, and I think in my presentation, I said something, it's an interesting thought experiment. If you look at 1800s LDS church culture, the Mormons in Utah, after the death of the prophet, how many of the 10 commandments were divinely reversed in some way or another? And I think you'll find that
that's a very powerful.
There's quite a few.
and
blood atonement is definitely the top one on
that's an incredible observation. Yeah.
So I think we've kind of hit this already, but essentially a divine reversal means what's wrong is right, what's bad is good, what's thou shalt not means thou shalt now. So you're not just justified or permitted, but it's something that's
how do you have a solid foundation when that foundation can be shifted to anything at any time?
Right. Exactly. All right. So like I say, I found this in the record. So where can it be found, and how did it enter the written record? So we're going to run through these sources. I did, like I said, I have a paper on this. I gave a presentation at the conference. There's a video for that if you find the Journal of Mormon Polygamy YouTube channel, where I go through much more of the paper than we'll go through today. And I also did an interview with the editor of the paper that is also on the Journal of Mormon Polygamy.
Highly recommend you watch that.
Yeah,
that's on the Journal of Mormon Polygamy YouTube channel, I believe.
Yeah, so both my interview with Tiani Coleman, the editor, and my presentation from the conference are on that channel.
Yes, I want to thank all the editors and the organizers of the event, and the people who put that on, because it's because of that work that Adrian's able to publish a paper like this. So let's talk about this document. I love this document. It's fascinating. The first time I read it was It's a paper written by, I can't remember his name. I could love them all. Where he goes, he has a very different take on the letter.
Anderson?
I believe so.
Yeah.
He has a very different take on the letter because he sees a direct connection to Joseph Smith. But go take us into this. This is a very, very important document.
That was a stunning conversation. And I want to thank Adrian for participating in this and for sharing those things that you shared and for your honesty, your vulnerability, and for I learned a lot by listening to you, by hearing your story and how the doctrine of polygamy affected you and your wife. I think it's so important to understand how this doctrine affects the hearts of our wives, of our children. Well, now that we've set that up and now that Adrian has introduced us to the divine reversal doctrine, next we get into some really good stuff, the nitty-gritty of the documents. If you're a history buff or you even love a good story, this is a must-watch. And if you've been confused by something like by some of the documents that you've heard of, like, for example, the happiness letter or the March 31st letter to the Relief Society and the two different copies that are there, or the changes to Joseph Smith's journal of October 5th, 1843, this next episode is going to really, really help you understand where does this stuff come from and how did it develop? And then in part 3, he's going to pay it off with a discussion of what we're calling the Big Kahuna, section 132, and how the divine reversal doctrine is on full display in that peculiar revelation. So stay tuned and come back for part 2, which is going to be released very soon on StillMormon. Thanks for stopping by.
What happens with the happiness letter ultimately?
Yeah, so the happiness letter actually ends up getting added to the history of the church.
Exactly right. Which is so fascinating.
It is.
Because who's the one doing this at the time?
But then you get to the final version of the history, and
instead of the denial,
the happiness letter is inserted into the history as an addendum without any explanation. What is this? So the question is, where did Richards get this teaching? Did it come from Joseph Smith, or did it come from somewhere else? And was Joseph teaching this publicly or privately?
And we should say that not too long after this, we don't know exactly when, but it is believed that he took his first plural wives as the Longstrauth sisters.